I don't have any money to give to those old geezers. I'm getting all of my husband's inheritance," declared the wife of my deceased son, loudly proclaiming this in front of us while still dressed in her mourning clothes. My son had been working for a major apparel company and was managing a store in a prime location in the city. However, at the young age of 27, he was involved in a tragic traffic accident and his life was cut short. While my husband and I grieved our son's death, we were also busy with the funeral arrangements. Yet, there she was, his wife, who had just lost her beloved husband to a sudden accident, without a single tear in her eyes. Instead, she seemed only concerned about the money he left behind, hardly helping with the funeral arrangements and constantly talking about the money, which only made me more suspicious and angry towards her. Let's not talk about that now. There's no will, so everything will be divided according to the law. At that, she twisted her face and shrieked in a shrill voice. What? I'm just telling the truth. Are you suggesting we go to court? Then bring it on. In front of the coffin where her husband lay, she stomped her feet like a tantrum-throwing child. Her hysterical and disrespectful behavior made me exasperated and hold my head. It was devastating enough to lose our son, and now I had to endure being screamed at by a greedy woman clamoring for money, barely holding back tears. While my husband efficiently arranged the funeral, he overheard our conversation and frowned, clearly disturbed. Stop it, please, just stop. The funeral is about to start. He was your husband. Please let him go peacefully. If you want the inheritance that badly, you can have it, I managed to say, looking down. Hearing this, she smirked vulgarly, reassured that she would get the inheritance. That's more like it. Of course, it should go to someone young like me. I wonder how much I'll get. I'm looking forward to it. The audacity. I cursed in my mind. She stood there, looking down on me as I sat with my head bowed. She couldn't see the slight smile that was forming on my lips. I wouldn't let this greedy woman, who didn't even mourn her own husband, get her way. With a trembling voice, I slowly said, "Yes. You can have it all. All of it. My name is Michelle." At 55, I had successfully raised our only son, Tyler. Now that he had moved out when he started his job, my husband and I live a relaxed life together. As a child, Tyler was always serious and kind, often helping people in need around town and taking a leading role in school events. He was often approached by friends for advice, and he would spend time on the phone with them or rush to their houses, always eager to help others. After graduating from college, he developed an interest in fashion and secured a job at a major apparel company. The company, a household name, operates many stores and commercial facilities primarily in the city center. His customer-first approach in his service role seemed to mesh well with his personality, as he received positive reviews from the company right from the start. However, the workload was heavy, and I heard he was very busy every day. Despite his busy schedule, he often showed his gratitude to us. "Thanks for letting me stay at home until I graduated from college and for paying for my education. This is my way of saying thanks," he would say, and take us out for meals on his payday or arrange trips for us. We felt blessed enough just to see him grow up healthy, but we were truly grateful for all that he did. I was proud to see how well we had raised such a good person. A few years ago, when he was 25, Tyler got married. His wife, Jennifer, came from the same industry but worked for a different company. "Nice to meet you, I'm Jennifer." Tyler and I started out working together, and after that, we began dating. She introduced herself with a bright, sparkling smile. Working in the apparel industry, she seemed to pay a lot of attention to fashion and beauty, and she was very attractive. I'm still learning a lot at work compared to Tyler, and now as his wife, I want to support him properly. "Please take good care of me," she said, smiling politely. When I told her she didn't need to be so formal, she smiled shyly. Her smile was charming, and I instantly liked her. I was genuinely happy that Tyler had found such a beautiful and capable wife. After their marriage, the relationship between Tyler and us, His parents remained excellent, and they visited us a few times a year. During those visits, we would share meals, which were always pleasant times that felt like warm family gatherings. Jennifer helped in the kitchen and kept me company, fitting comfortably into her role. She also had a lovely charm, and her occasional jokes spread laughter among us. Meanwhile, Tyler was promoted and took charge of a store in a prime location in the city. Of course, we celebrated this at our home with a dinner party that included Jennifer. Later, whenever Tyler had time off, the four of us would go on trips together, and I enjoyed hearing about their happy lives over the phone. Jennifer quit her job when they married and now supports Tyler full-time as a homemaker. We had also talked about having a child soon. And I was thrilled at the prospect of maybe seeing my grandchildren. I believed this peaceful and happy life would continue forever. However, that suddenly came to an end one day. My son Tyler was involved in a traffic accident during a work trip and lost his life. I received the call on a winter afternoon. My husband was at work, and I was at home doing chores when the phone rang. It was from the hospital, informing me that my son had been in an accident. My face turned pale instantly, and after contacting my husband, I rushed to the hospital where my son was. When I arrived, Tyler was in surgery. Jennifer, his wife, was already there and she simply nodded to me without any expression. A young doctor greeted us, probably because the veteran doctors were all busy with the treatment. The doctor, looking down, said, "We're doing everything we can, but it seems he was hit directly by a large vehicle running a red light, and the damage to his body is severe. Please, pray for his safety." After the solemn-faced doctor left, my husband arrived, and we desperately hoped for our son's survival. However, a few hours later, we received the worst news. I don't remember much after that. My son had a promising job, a happy marriage, and it seemed like he had a bright future ahead of him, and yet, at only 27 years old, his life was cut short. I cried out in front of his body and spent a long time grieving in the mortuary. Later, calmed down by the doctors, I managed to step out into the hospital corridor. It felt like the whole world had turned black, my heart filled with despair. In a waiting room, just the two of us, my husband and I cried together. He worked so hard, and he was only 27. It's so sudden, he must be feeling so frustrated and unresolved. My husband's face was a mess as he spoke through tears. Overwhelmed by grief, I couldn't bring myself to handle the hospital formalities or funeral arrangements. My husband had to take care of it all. Amidst my confusion, he was resolute and supportive, and I was deeply grateful to him. As for Jennifer, losing her husband must have been a shock as she bit her lip and looked down solemnly. I remember there were no tears, which made me wonder if she truly felt sad or if I was too overwhelmed to notice. Or was she just too distraught to cry because I was too upset? At that time, I was too consumed by my own grief to consider her feelings. But life does not wait. The funeral arrangements had to be started immediately, and despite my grief, I began to take action. My husband and I, were handling everything, but something was bothering me. Jennifer, who had been staying at our house since yesterday, didn't help at all. Although my husband was the chief mourner, she was still a family member and had lost her husband. It seemed only right that she should be doing something too. When we first married, she always helped around our house whenever she visited. So, I knew she wasn't someone who was inherently inconsiderate. What on earth is going on? And when she does speak up, it's only to talk about money. Hey, what happens to the savings he left behind? It's unthinkable to say that to parents in mourning. I felt a surge of anger and glared at her. My husband happened to be out meeting with the funeral director, so it was just the two of us. There's no will, so everything will be divided according to the law. But let's not talk about this now. We can sort it out later. When I said this, she sat heavily on the sofa, pouting. Her hair was glossy and impeccably styled, which seemed out of place at a funeral. But your husband and you are both old, right? I'm young, so I'll take all of my husband's inheritance. Her words made me stop in my tracks. She was belittling us for our age and brazenly claiming all the money for herself. Her audacity in making such a declaration filled me with an overwhelming sense of disgust. I told you, we can't decide this now. And you could at least help out a little. I thought I was being quite reasonable, but she didn't seem to appreciate my response. She furrowed her brow and came closer. What? You old geezers want your son's money? How shameless! Are you going to take me to court? Go ahead and try. As she raised her voice and became hysterical, I felt not only anger but also a rising sense of shock and sadness. I stared at her, wide-eyed. There was no trace of the bright and kind person she once was. Her face, now twisted with selfishness and disdain, looked like that of a stranger, and I felt a sense of fear. How did it come to this? Unable to process the situation, I stood there in a daze. Is this her true nature? Hey, Jennifer, what's happened to you? All you talk about is money. Tyler was your husband. You loved him, didn't you? Can't you show a little more respect? Trying to hold back tears of confusion, I looked up at her as she glared down at me. The room was filled with the scent of incense, and a smiling photo of my son was displayed nearby. In such a setting, why were we having this kind of exchange? What? Show more respect how? Cry my makeup off? Ridiculous. I never loved that boring, uptight man. I married him because he was a manager at a big company and I thought I wouldn't have to worry about anything. Her confession hit me like a punch. I always thought of them as a loving couple, often teasing them about being so in love. Tyler seemed to genuinely adore her. But was it all a lie? My fingers trembled with helplessness. I thought he'd earn even more money in the future, so it's a pity he died. But I'm not going to embarrass myself by crying like you, Mother. What? I was left speechless. This woman had viewed my grief over my son's death with such contempt. Getting you to like me was easy. Before I met him, I worked in the night service industry, so I'm good at pleasing older people. It felt great to fool you so completely. Clenching my shaking hands into fists, I stood up and glared at her. I had always intended to give my son's inheritance entirely to his wife. A young woman suddenly losing her husband would naturally feel uncertain about the future, and we had our own savings to live on comfortably. But after hearing her talk like this, I was infuriated. Now, I definitely didn't want to hand over my son's inheritance so easily. No. We will discuss this through a lawyer. For now, keep quiet and focus on the funeral. I told her firmly. She clicked her tongue loudly, pushed her long hair back, and left. Although she was a housewife, her appearance was oddly immaculate, and it was clear that she spent a lot on her hair and skin. Her possessions were also mostly from well-known brands. Before the marriage, she looked beautiful, but she was working then, so her polished appearance didn't seem strange. But now, she wasn't earning any money herself. Knowing that all of this came from my son's income made me feel an intense disgust. The funeral proceeded as planned. Tyler was very loving and a son we were proud of. I prayed that he would find happiness in heaven as we tearfully said our goodbyes. Later, when I told my husband about Jennifer, he was furious. That's unforgivable. She deceived not just us, but Tyler too. I thought it was our duty to support her life from now on, but not anymore. My husband was so angry that he slammed his hand on the table, spilling the tea placed there. As I hurried to clean it up, I met my husband's eyes and nodded seriously. It felt like we were avenging our deceased son. I would never let that woman have her freedom. A week later, we sat down with a lawyer to discuss the inheritance again. It turned out that Tyler, being the serious and diligent person he was, had saved a significant amount of money from his salary as a store manager. When Jennifer heard this, her eyes lit up with excitement. Having already shown her true colors once, she made no effort to hide her blatant greed. $200,000. Really? That's my inheritance, right? As his wife, I'm the primary beneficiary, correct? The lawyer continued to explain in detail, but Jennifer was too fixated on the amount to pay attention. Deposits in banks are not the only assets. She remained absent-minded, focused solely on the bank savings. As soon as the lawyer finished speaking, Jennifer turned to us with a forceful tone. "So, it's decided that I'll inherit everything, right? You two already have plenty of savings, and I have a long life ahead of me. Come on, just agree." Although she didn't call us old geezers in front of the lawyer, she didn't use any polite language and was completely self-centered and overbearing. "Come on, renounce the inheritance. You don't need it." Her high-handed attitude was so unpleasant that I felt overwhelmed, even though I was deeply irritated. Despite the passage of time, it was clear her attitude hadn't changed. I had hoped she might reflect and come to the discussion with a different mindset, but all my hopes were dashed, leaving me utterly unmotivated. She was impeccably groomed again, her hair perfectly styled as if she had just visited a salon, and her skin and eyes glowing with expensive cosmetics. On the table was her handbag, flaunting a famous brand logo. It looked almost unused, likely brand new. My husband, sitting next to me, clenched his fists, barely restraining himself from grabbing her. It was impossible to reason with her. I didn't want this conflict to drag on any longer. We were already devastated by the loss of our son, and I didn't want to prolong the trouble with our selfish daughter-in-law over the inheritance. Emotionally and physically exhausted, I had no strength left to continue fighting her. "All right, if you insist, I understand. We are old, and you are still young. My son earned that money for your life together, so you can have the inheritance." "Yes, all of it." When I said this weakly, her face lit up instantly. "Finally, you get it." Her shamelessness made me curse her silently in my mind. The lawyer documented our conversation, and thus it was decided that my son's entire inheritance would go to this arrogant woman. My husband and I left without speaking to each other, both wearing sullen expressions. A wordless frustration filled our hearts. After that, we spent our days in mourning for our son. But my husband continued to work, and I managed the household as usual. Except, there were no more calls from our son. I couldn't reach him anymore. Realizing this each time brought me to the brink of tears with a profound sense of loss. 3 months passed this way. The season moved past spring, the cherry blossoms had fallen, and fresh green leaves now covered the trees. My husband and I would take walks in the nearby park on weekends or sit quietly at home, reminiscing about our son. Those were sorrowful yet peaceful days. One afternoon, the phone rang. To my surprise, it was my son's wife. Since the meeting with the lawyer, we hadn't seen or spoken to her. She likely had no use for us anymore, and we didn't want to see her either. So why was she contacting us now? Puzzled, I answered the call. Her panicked voice came through the receiver. "Listen, I just received a demand for debt repayment. It's $180,000. So that's what it was, I realized. During the discussion with the lawyer, there had been something that caught my attention. But at that time, my daughter-in-law was so elated about the savings she was going to inherit that she didn't listen properly. My husband and I knew this, but chose not to say anything, relinquishing our claim to the inheritance and giving everything to her. "It's all my husband's debt. No one told me about this. Do I have to pay it back? Did you know about this?" Her loud, rapid-fire questions were irritating, and I sighed. "You inherited all of Tyler's estate. That includes the responsibility for his debts," I stated firmly. She let out a frustrated growl. While Tyler's company was indeed a large one, it had been struggling recently. The burden had been passed down to the store managers. Under company orders, Tyler had been forced into a practice known as forced sales, buying stock with his own money to boost sales figures. Being the earnest person he was, he probably felt a strong loyalty to the company. Unable to refuse the directive, he incurred a large debt to fulfill the company's demands. When I explained this to her, she screamed. "Forced sales? Debt? I didn't know anything about that." Of course you didn't. The lawyer explained it all at that meeting. So you knew I didn't hear it? Why didn't you tell me then? Her shrill voice screeched through the receiver. Well, you weren't listening. And you insisted on inheriting everything, even after the lawyer's explanation. I assumed you were prepared to take on the debts as well. My tone carried a hint of malice. She ground her teeth and continued to whine. But you could have made sure I understood. I consulted my lawyer, but it's been 3 months since the inheritance, so I can't renounce it now. Even if I inherit $200,000, with an $180,000 debt, I'll only have $20,000 left. Including interest and fees, I'll be in debts. This isn't what I expected. What are you going to do about it? Fed up with her complaints, I responded firmly. No matter what you say, it's not my problem anymore. Tyler is gone, and we are no longer family. If you want to blame someone, blame yourself for being blinded by greed. Before she could say anything else, I hung up the phone. I let out a deep sigh. Even now, she was a troublesome woman. She thought she would get a large inheritance, but ended up with a huge debt instead. She can get excited or panic all she wants, but I wish she wouldn't bother me with her complaints. It saddened me to think that my late son's wife turned out to be such a twisted person. I wondered if my son in heaven was watching our interaction. How must he feel? Anyway, whether it's the money she received or the debt, it's now her responsibility to manage it. She's an adult, and it's not my duty to worry about her. We would likely never talk or meet again. With that mindset, I returned to my normal life. I often visited my son's grave, cleaning it and offering flowers while reminiscing about the past. As the rainy season approached, I regularly cleaned the grave, which was dirted by the rain. A few weeks later, one day, the doorbell rang. It was a weekday, and my husband was at work. I stopped my chores and went to answer the door. To my surprise, standing there with a pained, almost tearful expression was my son's wife, whom I thought I'd never see again. "What brings you here?" I asked, and before I could say more, she pushed her way into the house and immediately dropped to her knees, bowing deeply. "Please, lend me some money." I felt dizzy for a moment. Why was it always about money with her? Crouching in the hallway, she looked up at me with pleading eyes. I can't pay off my husband's debt. Right after inheriting the money, I splurged and wasted it all. I went on overseas trips, bought multiple bags I wanted, treated my friends to expensive outings. Now I have no money left to pay off the debt, and it's become my debt. So, what does that have to do with me? I replied coldly. Everything was her doing. She had begged for my son's inheritance, wasted the remaining savings, ignored the debt details, and spent extravagantly. Why did she think she needed to tell me this? Did she think I would lend her money after hearing this story? Such immaturity was embarrassing. I talked to my own family first. But when I told them everything, they said it was my own fault and refused to help me. I have maintenance costs and living expenses for the house, and I have no income because I was a housewife. Please, just a little, even $20,000. Lend me that much. With a strong determination not to get involved, I responded in a cold tone. Who are you? Her face froze in shock. The wife of my deceased son is already a stranger to me. Trespassing and blackmail. I'm calling the police. Saying that, I picked up the receiver of the house phone. She must have believed I was really going to call the police. She twisted her face in anger, glared at me for a moment, and then quickly left my house. Then, I sprinkled salt at the entrance to ensure she wouldn't come back again. Jobless, accustomed to luxury, and drowning in debt. It's a fitting end for a greedy, evil woman who deceived both her husband and in-laws and didn't even mourn her husband's death. That night, when I told my husband about it, he took it seriously. He blocked her number on our house phone and our cell phones and contacted our lawyer to get a restraining order against her. To be extra cautious, we also informed our families not to engage with her if she ever showed up. Eventually, she had to repay her debts on her own. At first, she looked for a full-time job but kept applying for high-paying positions beyond her means and kept getting rejected. Meanwhile, time passed, and her debts grew rapidly, so she ended up surviving on low-wage part-time jobs. She even started working night shifts in customer service but couldn't make much money due to her age and quickly became gaunt. Despite this, she couldn't give up her extravagant habits and remained stuck in a cycle of debt. She had to give up her original apartment and move to a cheap, run-down place. And then, winter came around again. "It's cold," my husband said. That day marked the first anniversary of our son's death, and after the relatives finished the prayers and incense offering, we were having a meal. "Yes. I hope Tyler is warm in heaven," I replied. I wondered if my serious and kind son was watching over us from heaven. I hoped he had met someone good up there. "We've been through a lot, but we still have a future ahead of us. Losing our son was truly heartbreaking, but let's stay healthy and be together," I said, smiling at my husband, who nodded back with a smile. "We will continue to live on. Without greed, without pretenses, cherishing the person next to us, and living peacefully." The smiling face of my son in the photo displayed in the room was